Hello, and welcome to the Student Ministry Conversations podcast. This podcast is all about equipping, encouraging, and inspiring youth pastors weekly with topics that are brought to the table by youth pastors from all over the world. And now, here's your host for this week, Brent Aiken. All right. Hey, and welcome to the podcast. If this is your first time listening to us, we want to welcome you and invite you over to our website, studentministryconversations.org, where you can find all of our show notes, our episodes, some blog articles. And our goal with this podcast is to equip, inspire, and encourage you to be a better youth pastor for the church that you're serving in. And today, I have the privilege of sitting down with Shawna Riley. Shawna is my associate youth pastor. We have worked together for 5 years.
Yep, going on 6.
Right? Maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah, going on 6. So we've had some opportunities together throughout the years, and been doing ministry for almost 6 years together, and it's been a lot of fun. But with that, we were sitting down today to talk about the idea of curriculum. Just there's so much when it comes to curriculum that you can talk about, and there's always this ever-present battle, it seems like, especially in youth ministry worlds, where it's like, oh, well, God told me that I need to write my own, or like we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can go buy it from these websites that have people and teams and groups that are working to put this curriculum together. And so we just thought today might be a good opportunity to just talk through the different aspects of both and maybe present both ideas as a pros and cons list and why you might choose each for your ministry. Now, we say that pros and cons on both because obviously there's strengths of both and there are weaknesses of both, but we both don't believe that there's really a right choice when it comes to this. I think it's all about how you present it and how you utilize whatever you're using is the importance. So, but before that, Shawna, just overview, maybe a overview of your 6 years here, what you've used, your preferences, and how you've liked and disliked both, and then we can kind of break into each specifically and talk about them.
Yeah, for sure. So just a quick background, in our youth group, the way it's set up, I have the junior high. And so what I do with them is I have the 7th and 8th graders, and I rotate between New Testament one year and Old Testament the next year and kind of get that biblical foundation there. So when I first started with you, I very much was on the side of I was going to write my own curriculum, especially in the Old Testament realm, because there were very specific stories that I wanted to hit. And you can, of course, only hit so much in a year. And so I was very much, I wanted to write my own. That way I could hit the stories that I wanted, the foundational, figures in the Old Testament that lead to Jesus in the New Testament. And so I started off that, which I very much did like because I had control over the stories we were reading, the people we were going over, and kind of starting with that patriarchy of the Old Testament, kings of the Old Testament, and how that all pointed to Jesus. And it was great. And then eventually I quickly found out I was going to get burnt out if every week I wrote the curriculum for 2 years, basically, writing an Old Testament, New Testament, refining that curriculum every year to shape into what the kids connected to, what they really understood, what they learned. And so I moved into a curriculum study, which I found I liked, that still hit the points that I wanted to. And I did that probably for 3 years. I hit that curriculum instead. And then eventually, of course, it comes time. You've kind of gotten into that rhythm of doing the same thing, and you have to reevaluate, are the kids really connecting to this anymore? And so this year I started a brand new curriculum, which I really like because this year they have a devotional in front of them while I'm teaching them.
Yeah. And so just so people know, because I mean, obviously for the people that are listening, maybe they've been using curriculum. When you said those two curriculums, what were you using for those two?
That is a great question. So the first curriculum was handed down to me by Brent Aiken. Do I know the name of it? Do you know the name of
Yeah,
it?
so I do know the name of the first one. You chose the second one, so you're gonna have to do the second one. But so the first one was from YM 360. Or Youth Ministry 360. It was a curriculum called The Thread, and it was talking about tracing the thread of Jesus through the whole Bible. And so that was the one that she used at the beginning of her time. And like I said, that was one that I had already purchased, that I had already used previously. And I was like, hey, this is a good thing to get you started in curriculum. Like, I mean, it's a good curriculum, but as you said, as it starts developing and you're like, let's kind of switch things up, let's change this up. So, what did you change into?
Yes. Okay, so this year I ended up switching over to the Gospel Project. And they basically every semester kind of have a new study that they put out. And of course, you can go back into their older studies too. But it just gave me a lot more control over kind of focusing in more on where I wanted to focus. So after 4 years of teaching back and forth between the Old and New Testament, I kind of have focused in on our first study this year through the Gospel Project was Genesis, and then it started going into Exodus was our first semester. And so you're really hitting into the creation, your patriarchs of the Old Testament, talking about Abraham and Isaac, and kind of that foundational, how did this all start? And your first covenants with God and everything like that. And then this second semester, we're studying into Exodus, into Moses, which is really into that Old Testament trust in God. And the students are loving it. And so, with that, like I said, the previous two, while they were great, while they were wonderful, what I found was definitely with the students of today, they've just got done with school. They've been lectured to all day at school. And while some teachers might add in graphics and stuff, it's a very lecture style in most schools. And so I found that when they come to youth, I lose attention very quickly if I'm just sitting there telling them the lesson. And so this year, what's great with the Gospel Project is that they actually, you can order a kit and it comes with your leader's guide. It comes with graphics that you can use, but it also comes with a student manual, student devotional. And so while you're going through the lesson, they have the questions right there in front of them. They have the scripture right there in front of them. And so they're just a lot more engaged because they can be writing, they can be highlighting, they can be writing their own questions down. And I have just gotten so much more involvement and really them looking at the scripture and being like, oh, why is this? You know? And so I've really enjoyed that part of it. And with every devotional or scripture, with everything that I go into, I do have to look sometimes because, sometimes wording can confuse kids. And so, with everything you do, if you like that more your own writing style, that way it's in your words, that way you make sure the kids are completely understanding it. Going to a lesson format where you're buying something or you're getting something, you can still customize it, use that as your basis and then go in there and write your own notes and everything. It doesn't have to just be reading straight from it, right? You can add your own stuff into it for sure.
Yeah, so since we're kind of already into the realm of the whole like buying curriculum,
Mm-hmm.
let's go ahead and kind of just break that down. You've already talked about a lot of the pros of just this idea of you don't have to write it. That opens you up to spending more time on delivery, spending more time on involvement with the students, spending more time on prepping your leaders because your
Mm-hmm.
leaders can also have booklets so you're all on the same page instead of thinking, oh no, I didn't email them this week, I forgot, or something to that nature. You have those different aspects, but and then also the huge aspect of the fact that students have their own books, and so when they have their own books, you don't have to worry about printing anything off. You don't have to worry about, oh no, like I only printed 7 and we have 15 show up tonight, that is a problem that you might have to deal with the resource books, but they can always just share and look at a book together. And so those are all different great pros. But why don't we go ahead for just a second and talk about one of the typical biggest cons when it comes to resources or buying your own curriculum is the fact that money. I mean, churches don't always have a budget. Fortunately, we do, and so we have the availability to spend money. So why? I guess how can we work to circumvent that? And then obviously there's different options with this. With at least the Gospel Project, you don't have to buy the hard copies, and there's a couple different ways that you can actually get the materials to you. So how can you, maybe what are some ways that you can get around the cost? Because I mean, some people are probably asking, and I think we spent what, $300-400 ish.
Yeah, so what ups that cost? Your leader book is not that bad, right? Getting your basic leader book with some graphics and stuff, it is the step that I took, that I have bought 50, student books. And so that every student can have their own book, they can write in it, they can take it home, which is wonderful. But you do have that cost of, it's about $300 a semester. And so that is very hard on some churches. I would say if you can plan that out, if you can add it into a budget, into fundraising, if you can look out and know you're going to do that, that's great. I would highly suggest it, because then those kids can take those books home. But I know that's not going to be an option for everyone. So definitely one of the ways to circumvent that is you do have your leader book. And if you have any way of maybe taking a picture of your leader book, putting it up on a screen, and then giving students printed out note sheets, so you can make that yourself. We do that for the high schoolers because they, right now you're doing different lessons, but they don't have that book in front of them. They still want to take notes. And so we simply
Yeah.
give them a sheet of paper that says notes, it has lines, it has areas on them. And so you just give them a way to still write down the information. Maybe you put together a PowerPoint that says the scripture you're going to be reading, has the questions on the screen that you're going to be asking them. That's still going to give them that same way of better interaction than just hearing you. Because a lot of students, if I sit there and ask them a question, by the time I'm done with the question, or let's say the person next to them is answering the question, they're sitting there going, what was the question? What was I supposed to be answering? And they are like, I don't want to answer because I don't know if I've
Right.
understood this right. Where if they can yeah, where if they can visually see it, they can process it for longer periods of time than just me saying it. And let's be honest, definitely with junior high students, but even high school, they're going to be like distracted. They're going to be talking to their friends. They're going to be thinking over here, and you've asked their question, and they're like, oh no, she asked me a question and I wasn't paying attention. And now I have to ask her to repeat it, and I'm going to be embarrassed, right? And I never want my students to feel embarrassed and like they can't answer this question. So just giving them a way to visually see what you're talking about, and then a way to write it down. And so that's a less expensive way, as long as you have the leader book, and then you can somehow either give them a piece of paper that has the scriptures and has the questions on it, put it on a screen. You don't have to do the expense of everybody has to have a booklet. And then either you can collect those notes and give them their entire note packet back at the end of the semester, or they can take it home with them nightly, whichever one you would prefer.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that that's something that is um, important to understand is I think there's ways to work around all of the different issues that you might come across. I think that there is, I mean, it's one of those things. The other thing to think about is a lot of times, especially I think even Gospel Project offers this, is they have digital versions of it too, to where you can download the digital version and then just have that as a printable resource to where you can print the student books yourself. It might save you a little bit of money up front, but you're eventually just going to pay for your paper that you're printing and all those things. And so that's another way to circumvent it. The other thing that I think written curriculum or pre-written curriculum gets a bad rap on is sometimes, especially when you get into the youth ministry marketplaces and stuff like that, it's like, who wrote this kind of thing? And it doesn't necessarily fit. So I guess, what would be your recommendations on finding the right curriculum, or what ways would you do your own research to make sure that this curriculum was something that fit your group?
Yeah, for sure. And so, first off, I'd say when going in and looking at curriculum, first, really make sure you know what message you're wanting to get across. Like, what are the points you want to hit? What type of lessons are you looking for? Kind of have a list of, hey, when I'm going in, I want them to learn like the foundations of the Old Testament, the foundations of the New Testament. And what I mean by that is obviously we could spend like 2 years in the entire Old Testament, but what stories, what lessons are actually they going to be able to apply for themselves? Um, Jericho is great, but is it going to apply to my kids, right? Is walking around a city for 3 days, right? That has a lot of faith in God and stuff, but are they really going to connect to like that story versus the story of like Abraham being willing to sacrifice his only son, right? It's going to have a little bit more meat, maybe, that they can, at least in my experience, that they can grasp onto, right? And that's going to be different with every
Sure.
group. So know what you're looking for your group, that you know the points and lessons that you're wanting to hit when going in and looking, because there's a lot out there that will cover a very generic like a big section. There's ones that will cover more smaller sections. Like I said, I'm only covering this year studying the Old Testament, Genesis and Exodus, basically. And so that's a very small section of the Old Testament, but I found that is a section that my kids are interested in, that they really like grasp, that they dive deeper. So that would be my first thing when you're looking at the curriculum. Second thing is always, if you have someone that you know and you trust, and you're like, what curriculum do you like, right? I was given the gospel project by our children's ministers, that they've done it before, the children's version of it, and they really liked it. And so that's what got me looking at that one. And so it just flowed right. One of the things that we do is after our lessons, we break into small groups. And so this curriculum very much worked for our time frame and our setting too, because in it already basically had blocked off for me a lesson time for me, and then going into the devotional time with their small group leaders. And so look at a curriculum that works for your group, what you want your group to do, that would be beneficial for your small group leaders too, so that you're also not having to come up with either curriculum yourself to give to them for them to do, or they're having to come up with small group questions. And so it already like flowed into that very well.
Yeah, no, and I think that's huge. Having those resources made available so your small group leaders don't have to do any pre-planning, because at least from our current dynamics with your leaders, we have a high school teacher that is massively involved in a bunch of different things, and we have a senior in college. And so, very, very much, both of them are incredibly busy. They both are taking time out of their evening when they could go home and relax and chill and, kind of unwind from the day to be up in our youth program doing stuff with us. And so, last thing we want to do is say, hey, I know you worked all day, but I need you to work more. And I need you to go through and find all these different questions that you could ask your group. Instead, it's like, hey, here's a book. Here's all the resources you need, questions, scriptures, all of it. And then also your students are going to have books that they can follow along with you. And that just makes it easy for them. I mean, the easier you can make it for your volunteers, the better. And technically, in this aspect, easy doesn't necessarily mean lazy or bad. Easy just means that you're prepared, you have planned ahead of time, and you have those resources at their disposal, so they don't have to worry about it and they can just hit the ground and run. Which is really, really important when it comes to groups and managing time. Like you said, that's a huge thing, because when it comes down to it, realistically, your group probably meets within like between an hour or two on a Wednesday night or a Sunday, and that's it. You might have a different dynamic, but for the most part, that's how most groups are. And so, with that, like you want to make the most of your time, and more than likely, you have games, or you have a meal, or you have worship, or something else that's also taking up time. So, by the time you actually get to the lesson side, you've probably already shaved off at least a third of the meeting time. And so, you want to be as moving as much of a like a well-oiled machine as possible. And so writing or like finding your own curriculum is a great deal for that, because it takes out the guesswork, it takes out the extra steps and extra plans and all those things, and you can just kind of run, knowing exactly where you're going to go long before you get there. And that might be one of the cons to kind of, I guess, migrate into the written curriculum side, is there are limitations to written curriculum. And so, what are some cons when it comes to writing your own curriculum? You've said one so far. You said that just the fact of like, I had to write a new lesson every single week for 2 years. And
Yeah.
that's a lot of planning. You got to remember where you were so you can correlate them in time to make sure they all kind of mesh. There's a lot of stuff that goes in with that. So, what are some other cons, for writing? But then also, I mean, we talked about the pros too, just the benefits of, I mean, being able to know and like fine tune exactly what you need to say and need to do. So, just written curriculum, let's go over the cons. And then if there's any other pros that you didn't mention, we can go through those as well.
Yeah, and so written curriculum, I went in with the mindset I am a writer, right? I like to write. Um, I'm a good writer. I've written very long things, so I was like, I'm good. Every week, just a curriculum should be very easy. But what you think is going to last very long, like your entire, time that you have plotted out, can quickly become you fly through it in 10 minutes, and your kids are on one of those nights where they don't want to talk at all, and then you're just stuck there kind of like trying to ad lib more to your lesson. And so one of the cons is that you have to become very aware of how quickly you will go through your own writing, because it is your own words, because you're very comfortable with it, you're not pausing as much. It can be harder to make your own curriculum stretch just because you have written it. You do know it better, which is a great thing because you're more comfortable with it. It's stuff you know and everything. But every week, having to make sure that you wrote enough material for 30 minutes can quickly become more daunting than you think, even if you are a writer. And so I would say that is one of the cons, is making sure you are writing enough to last that 30 minutes, that you're writing enough questions to get your youth engaged. Part of the thing of the curriculum I have is it has game suggestions, it has question suggestions, it has video suggestions. And so you have to take into account when you're writing your own, to also add that stuff in, which is not necessarily a con, but it's one thing that you have to think of, is what game could I play with them here? What questions could I ask? Could I add in a video to this lesson to change it up, to hold their attention better? Is there anything else that I could put in other than words and questions to stretch this out? And so I think a lot of the time when we get stuck into writing our own curriculum, we forget there is other things that can help the students learn, like videos, like games, like doing skits with them, right? If we have a section of narrative that is very easy for them to act out, like David and Goliath, right? Having them act that out can actually help them memorize that story better. And so you have to remember when you're writing your own curriculum to add in more than just words to it. And so that's not necessarily a con, but it is something to remember. And like I said, the pro is you are going to know the curriculum better because it's your own words, it's something you've written down. You can probably go off script a little better when it's your own curriculum because you know where you're coming back to. Sometimes if you you had one of those days where it's just like one of those weeks, everything has happened, you haven't really gotten into your bot curriculum, and then you've gone on a rabbit trail and you're like, I don't know where this curriculum is actually reading, right? Or leading. Let me read where I'm supposed to be going. Where if you've written your own, you can kind of follow the kids on a rabbit trail over here and then come back on track more easier. That is definitely a pro to having your own, is that just naturally, because you wrote it, you're going to know it better. And so it does at the same time take a little bit more time because you're writing it, but you don't necessarily have to study it as much, if that makes sense, because you're basically studying it while you're writing it. And so it does kind of do that balancing act. And you're just,
Yeah.
like I said, you're going to know it better. So,
Yeah. No, and I agree. And the thing is like you said, I mean, just the mindset of even the extra planning of the videos or the games or activities or the craft or whatever, all of those being already written in and geared to whatever you're doing helps a lot because when you're already writing the curriculum, the chance of you having writer's block and not thinking of the perfect movie or the perfect clip from The Chosen or whatever you're doing. It is one of those things, and especially with I had to look it up because I knew it changed, but the average attention of preteens now they're saying is anywhere from 8 seconds to 2.7 minutes. And
yeah.
so it's they don't have an attention span, and so that's another downside unless you have those resources printed out when you're writing that curriculum. I know a lot of times with me when I write curriculum, I have my lesson. I don't think about small group questions. I don't think about giving them resources or anything to that nature. And so I mean, it's Squirrel City. They're all over. ADD is going woo, and
Yeah.
it's really, really hard to keep them engaged. And so, having going back to the written side of that is when they have the book in their hands, they are really, really working on being engaged because they can look down and they're actually reading what you're doing. They can draw and doodle on the paper while they're doing it. And so those are really, really good. But having those moments of change, whether it be, hey, let's look this up in your book real quick, or hey, why don't you go ahead and read this, or hey, y'all go ahead and write the answer down for this question in your booklets, or hey, we're going to watch this video. All of those things restart the attention span. And so that is one of the things that studies have gone into for just teaching across the board as far as education, whether it be biblical education or general education. It is one of those things that the more that we can switch up, the more that we can move things mentally from one location to another, the more attention that we have with preteens and teenagers. Otherwise, we're going to have what you said earlier, where it's just like, oh, wait, they asked me a question. Deer in headlights. And you just
Yeah.
kind of sit there because you don't really know what to do. And I think we've all been there at some point in our lives, whether it be adulthood or as a child. But so I think those are really, really good. And I think more than anything, what needs to be understood about curriculum is whether, I mean, even though there's pros and cons to both, I think that there is a season for everything. So I am one that goes back and forth. Right now, I am with high school. I'm working with high school, and they are writing their own lessons and then teaching them to the rest of the high schoolers. But we're about to switch here in not this week, but next week, we're going to switch and we're going to go into curriculum for a month. And so then after that, we're going to jump back out and we're going to go into written curriculum and lesson plans again, because it is something that when you have an idea of where you're wanting to go, like you said, you have those generalized points of, oh, hey, I know I want to touch on this, and this in Genesis, and I know I want to hit these 3 stories in Exodus. Or, hey, I know I really want to go after this theme in Exodus about how God like is reuniting and trying to bring his people back together. All these different things that are happening, you have an idea of where you want to go, and that's called scope and sequence. It's an education term, but when you have that roadmap planned out, then you can say, hey, my curriculum doesn't really cover this like I want it to, so I'm going to go in and write my own. Or you can say, hey, this works perfectly. I'm just going to go ahead and use this, and we're going to use this written and recorded curriculum that I just purchased off the internet to cover this section. And so there's a rhyme and a reason for both, but I think more than anything, it's you need a plan to organize your year, like Sean has been saying. And during that roadmap, you need to be aware of when it is okay or when it is appropriate to use each, because I think that there are times for both. But so I think as far as that goes, I think that's a pretty good list. Like I said last episode, I'm going to try and start throwing in a question that can be answered in comments or anything of that nature. And so my question is, which do you like more? Or maybe a better question is, which type of curriculum do you use more? As necessarily, like we just said, neither of them are bad, but there is a season for both. So which do you find yourself using more? We'd love to know. You can answer the question on Spotify, or you can tell us in comments or send us a message. We'd love to hear that. But Shawna, final closing, anything else as far as that goes? And then just as we always try to end our episodes, one thing that you would say to encourage youth pastors that are listening to this.
Cool. So, yeah, the only thing left that I thought of, as far as curriculum goes, whether you were writing your own, whether you were picking out a curriculum that's already been written, I think one of the big things is make sure it's relatable to the kids, right? Make sure the language is appropriate for the age that you're teaching. Make sure if there are some big words in there, you're prepared to explain what they mean, or you're prepared to reword them. And then always make sure it's up to date. Some curriculums can have some statistics that are a little out of date, and the kids catch it. They're like, wait a minute, what? So whether you're writing your own, whether you're looking, make sure you're ready to give up-to-date stuff, that it's language that they understand, that it's modern to them, and that it's appropriate. Because 6th grade to 12th grade, there's a big gap between the language needed in those studies. So I think that's kind of the last thing that I can think of as far as curriculum goes. So.
Okay. And then just word of encouragement, anything you want to say for anybody listening?
Word of encouragement. You are doing great. You are doing wonderful. You're going to get highs. You're going to hit lows, and it's okay. Keep going. Keep relying on God. Try new things, and you will survive. You will keep going. So.
We will survive, indeed. So that is all that we have for this podcast episode. Like I said, if this is your first time listening to us, we'd love for you to check out our website and just go explore our episodes. This is, I think, episode 192. So we have quite a few, and I looked before we hopped on, and Shawna was on the podcast 105 episodes ago. And so she was under a different name, because when she was on the first time, she wasn't married, and now she is. So her first episode is under Shawna Johnson. This one will be under Shawna Riley. But if you go back and listen to her other one, it was great as well. And it was talking about using drama and skits in your youth ministry. And so you should definitely check out that as well as the rest of our episodes. But then also, we'd love for you to help us share our podcast with the greater student ministry audience that's out there. You can share our posts, share our episodes on social media using @TalkStudentMen, so you can tag us in it as well. Or you can just share with a youth pastor friend an episode that stood out to you. That way we and our episodes get out to more people and hopefully can be a help and a resource for others. And then also, finally, if you'd like to be like Shawna in the future and be on an episode, we'd love to have you. One of the things that we've done with this podcast is for 192 episodes, we have had youth pastors come in and be the voice, because we feel like everybody has a voice and everybody has something we can learn from. And we really, really mean that. So if you want to be on the show, we'd love for you to be. You can send us an email at podcast@studentministryconversations.org, or you can shoot us a message on social media @TalkStudentMen on all the big platforms, and we would love to set up a time. But Shawna, thank you so much. I appreciate you getting on, and we are looking forward to letting everybody hear this. And so if you are listening to this, we hope that you have a great week, and we will see you for the next episode.